afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Good late afternoon and evening to those of you who are joining us from the UK, and good morning for those of you joining us on the West Coast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ethan Marcus. I'm the Managing Director of the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America, the national umbrella organization for the Ladino-speaking Sephardic communities in the United States. We're so happy to have you, both returning guests as well as new friends and new faces for this new and special program with Dayan Daniel Kada. Just as a reminder for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this program, along with many of our other classes, are through the Sephardic Digital Academy, a brand new initiative started just about a year ago now from the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood on a whole host of programming and education involving the Sephardic community, ranging from Sephardic Torah and Halakha to Sephardic cooking, Ladino language and culture, history, and so much more. If you're interested in learning more about our other programs, please check out our website at sephardicbrotherhood.com/Sephardic Digital Academy. Now today we have a very special guest, the first time we've had him on for one of our programs, Dayan Daniel Kada. A little bit about Dayan Kada. He's the rabbi of the Laguna Road S&P Sephardi Synagogue, registrar of the Sephardi Beth Din, and director of education at Tiferet Eyal. Having studied for almost 10 years in Gateshead, Mir, and in the Kollel of Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu Zecher Tzadik Livracha, where he obtained a semicha in conjunction with the Israeli chief rabbinate. Rabbi Kada is recently completed his Dayanut, qualifications through the Eretz Hemda Institute of Jerusalem and the Montefiore Endowment. Dayan Kada also read law at King's College in London as a Dickens Spoon Scholar, graduating with first-class honors and winning the Brian K. Leiden Paisner Law Prize. He is sought after lecturer in Halakha and in Jewish philosophy. And we're so happy to have him here today in partnership with the S&P Sephardic community of the UK. Dayan Kada, whenever you are ready.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Ethan. And it's my pleasure to be able to share some ideas with you this afternoon, morning, wherever you may be across the world, to our American and English guests. So yes, it's my great honor to be able to present a lecture for the Sephardic Brotherhood of America, and I hope it will be the first time of many other times. Please God, we'll be able to work together. So I work for the Spanish and Portuguese community in England. Some of you from America may know the S&P in New York, but here in London we have 4 S&P communities, in Manchester another 2, and so what we want to do this afternoon is go through a teshuvah of the Miri. We're going to talk about who the Miri was, and we're going to explore a fundamental question which is going to come over and over again throughout the lecture tonight, and that's the question of whether there is a contradiction between being well versed in contemporary science, contemporary philosophy, and at the same time being a pious and religious and believing Jew. And that's going to be the core of the lecture this evening. This evening we're going to go through this afternoon maybe we're going to go through the historical overview of this teshuvah, and next week we will delve and analyze this teshuvah in greater detail. So who is the Miri? The Miri was born in 1249, and he completed his main work, which was the Bet HaBehira. Bet HaBehira is a commentary on the Gemara based on the style of the Rambam. He completed this work in 1300, the age of 51. His real name was Menachem ben Shlomo, but he was called Meiri seemingly because he had an ancestor who had that name and was an honorable ancestor of the family, and that's why he carried his name. But his real name was Menachem ben Shlomo, but he's more commonly known as HaMeiri, the Meiri. And to appreciate his teshuvah, we need to understand the historical context of the teshuvah, because the Miri will be referring to many things which we need to understand the background behind. And in this teshuvah, in this response of the Miri, we're going to touch on many important things, but I want you to pay attention to 4 things which we're going to come across. That's number one, the jurisdiction of one community over another. When does one community have the ability to dictate what happens in another community? Whether it's in a different country, or in the same country, in different parts of the country, or even in the same part of the country. When does one community have the right to say something about another community? That's number one. Number two, is there any point in making bans and excommunications? Do these things carry any weight? And is there any point in doing these things? And this is going to be addressed in the 13th, 14th century. We're going to have to try to relate that back to today's world. Third concept which we'll be discussing is allegorizing the Torah. When do we have the right to allegorize the Torah? When is it wrong to allegorize the Torah? What's the extent of allegorization? All of these are fundamental questions. And fourthly, and most prominently, is the pursuit of philosophical studies as religious Jews. So those are the four things we're going to be touching upon within this teshuvah. Well, number one, jurisdiction. Number two is bans and cherems, excommunications. Three, the Torah being allegorized. And fourthly, the pursuit of philosophical studies. Okay, so let's go right back to the beginning in order to get the historical context of what's going on. So, as early as the 12th century, the Jews living in Muslim lands, they started to interact with those around them, and they started to learn about the philosophy of ancient Greece, which had been transmitted down to the Arabs living in the Muslim lands which the Jews were living in. And already, as early as the 10th century, there were Hachamim who sought to reinterpret part of the Torah as a result of this new knowledge which they had learnt and received. And the most prominent Hacham in this first phase was, of course, Rav Saadia Gaon, who wrote the book Emunot V'Deot, the book of beliefs and opinions. And in this book, he incorporated the basic philosophy of the Islamic Kalam school. So already then we're seeing that the Hachamim of the time are recognizing that we may need to re-understand certain parts of our Torah in light of this philosophy which we are learning. And this trend continued into the 11th, 12th centuries through Hachamim such as Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra. Then you have Rabbi Avraham ibn Dawood. This is the first Ra'avad, not to be confused with the second and third Ra'avad. Second Ra'avad, who was the one who argued with the Rambam famously. This is the first Ra'avad. He wrote a book called Emunah Rama. And all of these Hachamim continued this tradition of trying to incorporate the knowledge which they had been given from the Arabs around them. And of course, this continued all the way through till Rambam in the second part of the 12th century. And just to be sure, yeah, not all the Hachamim in Muslim Spain felt drawn to this Greco-Arabic philosophical tradition. Yeah? You have, for example, Hachamim such as Rabbeinu Bahaye, Ibn Pakuda, author of Chovot HaLevavot, Duties of the Intellect, or Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi, the Kuzari. They had very different visions. They sought to understand the Kadosh Baruch Hu through a different means. And to those Hachamim, we're not going to be, that's not going to be the focus of our attention this evening. I'm talking about the other trend, which, as I said, began with Saadia Gaon and went all the way through to the Rambam. Those are the kind of Hachamim we're talking about. And I want to, for you to appreciate this, I want to show you a map. I'm going to share the screen. And we will refer back to this map throughout. But have a look here. If everyone can see the screen, you'll see the map on the screen. And what we have here is Europe. Okay? Here we have Spain, where my mouse is, France, and of course England is over here. So so what's happening here is that in southern Spain you have Andalusia. This is the south of Spain. The north of France and Germany, that's where the Ashkenazi Rishonim are. Of course, there were even Ashkenazi medieval rabbis living in England, famously in London, in Lincoln, and in York, in the north of England. So that's all happening there in the north of France, Germany, and England, which we're not really going to go into. What we want to focus on is here Andalusia, Catalonia, and the south of France, which was known as Languedoc. And what happened is that many of these Hachamim who were interested in the philosophy of the time were living in southern Spain, in Andalusia, which in the 12th century was under Muslim control. In 1147, though, the Jews of Andalusia were forced out of their homes when radical Muslims from North Africa persecuted the Jews of southern Spain. And some Andalusian Jews decided to move elsewhere in the Islamic world. Some relocated to northward of Spain, which was Christian at the time. But a significant group reached Languedoc, south of France. And the thing is that in Languedoc, so where's that map on? So in Languedoc, you have these Hachamim who have never been exposed to the Greek and Arab philosophy. And then you have Hachamim who are coming from Andalusia, from the south of Spain. It's really important we understand the geography here. So we've got Spain, the north of Spain, which is Christian, the south of Spain, which was Muslim, and then you've got the south of France. And south of France, they're more open than the north of France. And those who have been exiled from the south of France, Andalusia, who there they were entrenched within this very much philosophical outlook to Torah, they are making their ways to different places across the world. As I said, a big majority of this exile went to the south of Spain, to Languedoc. And this, of course, caused an impact on the Jews of southern France in Languedoc, because they weren't used to this. And before these Hachamim from south of Spain arrived in Languedoc, these Jews had no knowledge of the Arabic language in which the learning of Andalusia was contained. And once people started to hear of the new Hachamim who have arrived from the south of Spain and their philosophy, the Hachamim in Languedoc, who were intellectually open, they commissioned for many of the major philosophical works to be translated, the works which had come from Andalusia, to begin to be translated from the Arabic in which they had been written into the language of Languedoc and into Hebrew. And famously, we've all heard of the Tibbon family, right? Shmuel ibn Tibbon, who was the main translator of Rambam's works. And this Tibbon family came from Languedoc, from the south of France. And there were 5 generations of the Tibbon family who were involved in the translation of these works. Straight away, as soon as they came, beginning of 1147, they began translating these works. And as I said, this continued for 5 generations of the Tibbon family. And they began with the basic works of Rav Saadia Gaon, Rabbeinu Bahaye, Shlomo ibn Gabirol, and of course the Rambam, the Moreh Nevuchim. And Rav Shmuel ibn Tibbon, he translated the Moreh Nevuchim, the guide to the Perplexity of the Rambam, in beginning of the 13th century in 1204. But after 50 years of translation of the important philosophical Jewish works, the Hachamim in Languedoc wanted to learn more. And this translation continued from Arabic into Hebrew, for works of maths, medicine, physics and astronomy, all very important disciplines in those days. And as you can imagine, this had a huge impact on the Languedocian culture. Because when you're being exposed to this great mass of knowledge, which hitherto was inaccessible, then this is going to start to change the way you think and the way you view things. And so by the end of the 13th, beginning of the 14th century, Languedoc had been transformed into a hub of intellectual curiosity and philosophical and scientific investigation. So is that clear so far? Is everyone still with me? Feel free to ask any questions. It's really important to me understand the geography, what's going on here. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or to send it in the chat box. That's fine. So that's where we are. So we've got these Hachamim coming from South Spain, and they're making a huge impact on the Jews in South France. Now, one other thing we need to appreciate, and I'm going to share the screen again for this. Let's have a look at the screen now. So again, you've got here Andalusia in the south of Spain. They're all making their way up now, and they've made their way into north of France. So you got Montpellier, you have Perpignan, you have Narbonne, Béziers, even in Toulouse there were. So this whole area is now being occupied by these Languedocian Jews who have welcomed the influx of Jews from the south of Spain. Now, interestingly, in between you have Barcelona, and here Catalonia, that's the north of today's Spain, that was under the sovereignty of a different kingdom than Languedoc. So Languedoc here in the south of France is under French jurisdiction, and Barcelona and Catalonia here in the north of Spain is under the Kingdom of Aragon. And so it's a different jurisdiction. And as a result of this, there was very different cultures going on. And in the north of Spain, in Catalonia, Kabbalah was becoming much more pronounced and accessible, with Hachamim such as the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachmanides, and the Rashba, Shlomo ibn Ideret, which we're going to come to later. They're living in the north of Spain, in Catalonia. And Kabbalah, as I said, is becoming more and more influential there. But in the south of France, in Languedoc, that hasn't spread. And Languedoc is becoming a center due to the influence of the Hachamim from Andalusia, becoming a center of incorporation of philosophy and science with Torah. Catalonia, a center of Kabbalah. So that's quite remarkable if you think about it. Two countries right next to each other, with sharing very different philosophies, and that's going to be the crux of the problem, which we're going to encounter in this Teshuvah of the Miri, is that Barcelona and Catalonia have one philosophy over here, and the Languedoc, despite their proximity, have a very different one. And so, that's the geographical context of this Teshuvah, which we're going to see. Now, having discussed the geography, now let's move on to the controversies concerning the Rambam, because this is relevant. The Teshuvah, which we'll be discussing, was written in 1305. Rambam had a number of controversies. Rambam died in 1205. During his lifetime, he had some minor controversies. He was accused of denying certain things. That's not really relevant for today. But the main controversy concerning the Rambam was after his death. So, as I said earlier, the Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim, his main philosophical work, the Guide to the Perplexed, was translated into Hebrew in 1204. Until then, it was only accessible to Arab speakers, and that didn't really ruffle any feathers. But as it started to be translated into Hebrew and more people started reading it, there was unease with Rambam's incorporation of Greek and Arab philosophy. And this is famous, the Rashba of Montpellier. So let's have a look back at the screen again. So Montpellier is over here. If you can see on the screen, Montpellier. Interestingly, in the south of France. So he was a bit of an outliner there. Abshon ben Avraham of Montpellier, together with Rabbeinu Yonah of Gironde, they stirred the Hachamim of northern France to enact a universal ban against all the works of the Rambam due to his supposedly heretical ideas. And their arguments were basically threefold, which we will see will recur again in the later stages of this controversy. They had three major problems. Number one was theological, is that the Rambam and those who followed him were depicted as these rationalists who would deny anything supernatural, everything has to be natural, prophecy is a natural phenomenon. This all, they argued, undermined the authority of the Torah. That was one major issue. Another issue was the allegorization of the Torah. They had a problem with the fact that the followers of the Rambam seemed to reinterpret so many parts of the Torah, making them into symbolizing the Torah and allegorizing it, and in the course of doing so, denying, they claimed, this was their claim, denying some of the historical value of the stories in the Torah. And the third allegation of these Hachamim against the followers of the Rambam was practically these philosophers were lax in observing the mitzvot. They argued that as a result of this philosophy, they never really took observance of mitzvot properly and seriously. And these three, so again, three claims: theological, that you Hachamim who follow the Rambam, you deny anything supernatural. Number two, the allegorization of Torah. Number three, practically the shmirat mitzvot, the observance of mitzvot is lax in these people. And therefore they decided they're going to ban, a universal ban, anyone to study any of the works of the Rambam. Now you think about that today, that's just unbelievable. Because today the Rambam is used in every single yeshiva. If you go to yeshiva and you haven't opened the Rambam Mishneh Torah, then you haven't really experienced what it means to be in yeshiva. Right? The Rambam is so crucial in everything. And if you can imagine Hachamim banning the Rambam, we're not talking about the Moreh, we're talking about all of his works. That's something quite severe. And this is all happening in 1232. So it's about 30 years after the death of the Rambam. And there was a big upheaval as a result of this ban, which was initiated, as I said, by Shlomo ben Avraham of Montpellier. And as I said, the Hachamim in Languedoc were much more intellectually open. And when they heard that Shlomo from Montpellier, who was living with them in Languedoc, had done this, the Hachamim in Languedoc actually put Reb Shlomo of Montpellier in Herem. They excommunicated him. He said, how dare you open your mouth against the Rambam? The famous Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, right? He was from Narbonne. I showed you before on the map. Narbonne is in Languedoc. He was one of the strongest defenders of the Rambam. He was furious what the Shlomo ben Avraham of Montpellier had done. And this whole controversy ended extremely badly, as we know, with the burning of Rambam's books in public. This was a very, very sad time in our history. But then after that, basically, this matter was put to bed, and the Rambam gained acceptance again. And people started to study him. So that was the first controversy, which we're not going into in this teshuvah, but it will be referred back to. The first major controversy concerned the Rambam after his death, but I want you to note, very importantly, that here, those who were fighting against the Rambam in 1232 were fighting for a complete ban against philosophy, a complete ban against Rambam. It's very different to what we're going to be seeing in this next controversy, which is the focus of our attention for the rest of today's lecture and next week. So now, is everyone with me still? If anyone's got any questions, we can ask now. Because now we're going to move to the actual controversy, which we're going to be discussing now. Okay, good. So the controversy which the Meiri, who I introduced at the beginning of the lecture, came to address in 1305, began at the end of the 13th century. And this was to be the last controversy regarding the Rambam. And fascinatingly, the Rambam was no longer the problem. Everyone's moved on from 1232. By the end of the 13th century, everyone as a whole is happy with the Rambam. No one's got any problems with the Rambam anymore. The problem, though, is the followers of the Rambam. And as we explained in the 1230s and 1232, the traditionalists, those against the Rambam, they wanted a total ban of study of philosophy. In this controversy, though, which we're talking about at the end of the 13th century and beginning of the 14th, no one is arguing for that. Even those arguing for a ban accept the validity of philosophy and science, and they do not seek to totally ban the study of philosophy. They only try to limit it, especially amongst the younger parts of the Jewish nation, who lack the, it was claimed, lack the intellectual maturity to deal with the challenges of philosophy. And what they rejected mainly was the fact that since Rambam, in the 100 years since his death, many of his followers had allegorized scripture and Torah in a very extreme fashion. And it was alleged, I don't know if this is true, but it was alleged that they denied the story of creation, they denied miracles in the Torah, and also another issue was the possibility of synthesis synthesis between Torah and between philosophy. And the main protagonist this time, as we saw in 1232, the main protagonist was Rashba of Montpellier. Despite living in Languedoc, and he was, as we saw, he was castigated by his fellow Hachamim in Languedoc. Again, the same thing happens this time, is that the main protagonist comes from Languedoc, surprisingly. And his name is Abba Mari. Okay, Abba Mari is also called Astruk Hayarhi. Why is he called Hayarhi? So where is Yar? It's from Lunel. If you have a look on the map, Lunel is a city just outside Montpellier. Where is it? Here it is. If you can see on the map, you'll see Lunel is just outside Montpellier. So he's called Astrak Hayarhi, like from Yariyah, from the moon, Lunel. So again, coming from the same area as Reb Shlomo ben Avraham of Montpellier. And he had a big problem with all of this. Now, you have to understand something really important. He himself was a major philosopher. He himself loved Rambam. But he was a moderate Maimonidean. And he felt that others had taken the Rambam too far. And so what he does is he turns to Rashba. This is the famous Rashba, Shlomo ben Avraham Aderet, who's in Catalonia in Barcelona. And he turns to him because the Rashba at the time was one of the leading halachists. So he turns to him for guidance on what he views as these allegorical interpretations of the Torah, which Abba Mari views as being heretical. And Abba Mari exchanges letters with so many people, and at the end of all of this, he puts together all these letters in a book which he calls Minhat Kenaot, the offering of jealousy, of zealousy, which is available on Otzar HaChochmah, in which he collects 127 letters during this controversy, forwards and backwards. And let me ask you a simple question. Again, let's look at the map. Abba Mari is in, as we said, Lunel, in Languedoc. And he's writing to Rashba, who is in Barcelona, here. All the Hachamim living in Languedoc, why is he writing to Rashba here in Barcelona? Why has he neglected all of the Hachamim in Montpellier, in Narbonne, in Péprian, the Miri in Péprian, Béziers, in Toulouse? Why has he neglected them and gone to Barcelona? Especially as we said earlier on, that these were two different jurisdictions. This is, of course, under French jurisdiction, and here this is Catalonia, Aragon. Why? Any suggestions? Why would he go from south of France to Catalonia? Any ideas, anyone? No? So, no, not because the borders weren't heavily defined. It was clear there was two different jurisdictions, but simply because Abba Mari knew he would never get support for what he was going to do in south of France. Abba Mari asks the Rashba to make a ban from anyone studying philosophy or science under the age of 30. He says, we see people studying from a young age, and they end up becoming heretics and allegorizing the Torah. Therefore, I want to ban philosophy and science under the age of 30. Over the age of 30, you begin to study. Now, Abba Mari knows that no one in Languedoc in south of France, who have had 150 years of exposure to the Hachamim of Andalusia, are going to accept this proposition. He knows that. So all he can do is go to somewhere where he feels will have sympathy for him. And that's the Rashba. The Rashba may have sympathy and may give him support because he's in a different philosophy, a different culture. And what's really strange, and when you read about this, it's so bizarre. But this is what happens when you are fighting something, and you turn to sometimes people who are very different to you to support you. And this is extremely strange, because Abba Mari himself, as I said, he was a great supporter of Rambam, and he acknowledged that the Moreh Nevuchim, the guide, is the authoritative expression of the Torah's inner philosophical meaning, which he, Abba Mari himself, called Ma'aseh Merkava and Ma'aseh Bereshit. Like Rambam identifies Ma'aseh Merkava as philosophy and Ma'aseh Bereshit as theology and the sciences, Abba Mari fully agreed with this. And he believed strongly that we have to learn philosophy and science in order to be fully complete in our Avodat Hashem, in our service of the Almighty. But he felt, you have to wait, you can't do it as you're young. The Rashba is from a totally different school. The Rashba didn't share this understanding with the Languedocian Jewry of the importance of the synthesis of philosophy and science in Torah. For Rashba, the concept of Ma'aseh Merkava, the work of the chariot, that's not philosophy, that's not science, that's the study of Kabbalah. And so, Abba Mari and Rashba are from two totally different schools of thought. And this is why their alliance is so surprising. Abba Mari is a moderate Maimonidean who has, broadly speaking, has the Languedocian philosophy. The importance of philosophy, the importance of science, the importance of... Rashba he's a Kabbalist. For him, philosophy is not a waste of time. Abba Mari's got no choice. He realizes that no one in Languedoc is going to support him. So he has to say, he makes this strange and unexpected partnership when he can't gather local support. So he turns outside his community to Rashba, to who he believed would give him a sympathetic ear. And amazingly, was very funny when I read this, because Abba Mari, in one of his letters to Rashba, he writes of his shock. Abba Mari writes, I'm shocked. There are people preaching the secrets of the chariot, the Ma'aseh Merkava, in public, the secrets of philosophy. They're preaching it in public. And you know what the Rashba's response is to Abba Mari? Is, I don't think these people are revealing any secrets, because philosophy isn't the secrets of the Torah. So you see here this, it's fascinating, this two totally different approaches of Abba Mari and Rashba, south of France, Languedoc, and north of Spain, Catalonia. And they make this alliance due to not having anyone else. I mean, that's often what happens. When you have a goal, you will often join forces with those who share very different views from your own views. So what was Abba Mari's, coming back, what was Abba Mari's main problem? So Abba Mari believed that, look, philosophy is a part of the Torah. Science is part of the Torah. But this study of Torah and the synthesis of Torah with science has to be restricted and reserved for the great Hachamim. Those who have perfect knowledge of Torah, those who have reached an appropriate age, and are able to guard themselves against the dangers of philosophy. Those who engage with these fields before reaching an appropriate age and intellectual maturity would end up deviating from the true meaning of Torah. And Abba Mari again made the same claims which we heard in 1230. He said, firstly, is that people are allegorizing the Torah too much. Secondly, they're rejecting miracles. And thirdly, they're lax in Shmirat HaMitzvot. And one mitzvah, I don't know why, one mitzvah which comes up over and over again, allegations of people of the philosophers being lax with, is the mitzvah of tefillin. Apparently, and I was quite shocked to read this, apparently there was some philosophers, some hachamim, this is the allegation Abba Mari puts forward. So that's his side of the story. Apparently there was some hachamim in Languedoc who, due to their intellectual and philosophical studies, explained that the whole mitzvah of tefillin doesn't really need to be done on a physical plane. You don't have to actually put these straps around your heart and on your head. You have to think about the message of the tefillin. That was the accusation Abba Mari leveled against them. Now, whether this is true or not, I don't know. So if it's true, it's a very severe accusation. But the Hachamim of Languedoc totally opposed this, and they believe no, it's open for everyone. If it's an important part of Torah, then there's no reason to neglect it. So Abba Mari, as I said, turns to Rashba in Spain, and Rashba initially is reluctant to intervene. He writes back clearly to Abba Mari, he says, this is beyond my jurisdiction. You're in Languedoc. I can't help you with this. And what Rashba does agree to do is he writes a letter signed by the Hachamim of Barcelona, asking the Hachamim of Montpellier, this is a request, to ban the philosophical works of the Greeks and the Arabs until a person has reached 30. And he writes to the Hachamim of Languedoc saying, look, if you do this, then I will add, me and my Beddin and my Hachamim in Barcelona will agree to you and will also add to this ban. And in, I think it's 1303, I think it was, Abba Mari receives this letter, and he reads this letter out in public in various shuls and synagogues in Languedoc, but no one really pays attention, and so the matter is forgotten for a bit of time. And Abba Mari tries to go back to Rashba and get his support again. It's not forthcoming from the Rashba. But then Abba Mari manages to secure the support of one major Hacham in Languedoc, and this was his uncle uncle of Avamari, Rav Colonimus, son of Todros of Narbonne. And when Rashba hears that this Hacham, Colonimus, is ready to take part in this ban, Rashba agrees to get more involved. And in July 1305, the Rashba, together with 33 Hachamim in Catalonia, they issue a ban. If anyone dares to study philosophy or science under the age of 25, in the next 50 years, then they're going to be put in harem. So he makes this, I'm going to show you the text of this harem in a moment. So he makes this harem, this excommunication, and he attaches to this harem 2 documents. In one document, he urges the Hachamim of Languedoc to follow suit, to say, you do the same thing. And in the second document, he directly puts in harem immediately the alleged Languedocian heretics, those allegorists who are apparently denying the miracles of Torah. So he's done 3 things. The first thing he's done is put out a harem. I'm going to show you this harem in a moment. He puts out a harem. For the next 50 years, anyone who dares to study philosophy or science under the age of 25 will be excommunicated. In the second document, he urges the Hachamim of Languedoc do the same. And the third document, he says, I'm putting you now in harem, those of you already now in Languedoc who are allegorizing the Torah. And he writes, he's extremely upset with someone called Levi ben Hayim. He writes very sharp things about him. So let's have a look at this ban. The Rashba is here. So this is the Rashba's. This is on the July 1305. He begins with talking about how sad this all is, and he says as follows. You should be able to see on the screen. Ve'amadu ve'karatu brit. We made a covenant. Okay, here we are. Ve'gazarnu ve'kibarnu alenu azarenu. We have decreed and accepted upon us and our children. V'nevim alenu, all those under our jurisdiction. B'kol ha'herem. Less communication. Le'ba lilmod ishu b'nei keilatenu. The non-violent community should learn b'sifrei yavanim asher hibberu b'chokhmat ha'teva b'chokhmat ha'elohut. Any of the Greek or Arab books which were composed regarding science and philosophy/theology. Whether they're in their initial Arabic or they've been translated into Hebrew. As I explained at the beginning, all of these works are being translated into the Hebrew. For the next 50 years, unless you're under the age of over the age of 25. And no one from our community should teach any Jew any of these disciplines until 25. ימשכו אותו החוכמות ההם אחריהם ויסירו אותו מאחורי תורת ישראל שהיא למעלה מן החוכמות ההם, in case they stray as a result of this study. So that's the Rashba's ban, and this is in 1305. Now just one point in parentheses. Where is the Rosh in all of this? The Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher ben Yehiel, he was a famous Hacham at the time. He seems to be quite silent in all of this, and he's very silent. And the reason being is the Rosh tells the Rashba, I can't even support you, because you're implying that after the age of 25 you can study philosophy and science. But there's a teshuvah of the Rosh about this. I believe this is it's asur any time to study, even over the age of 25. So the Rosh from Ashkenaz, originally from northern France, couldn't support this at all. That was the philosophy of the Hachamim of northern France and of England. But here we are in Spain and in southern France. So here the Rashba is saying, fine, you want to study philosophy, I can accept that. You have to be a certain age. So we're going to come towards the end now. And here, when the scholars and the Hachamim of Montpellier and Languedoc hear this, they're absolutely enraged. They're enraged, firstly, the Rashba is getting involved in their issues. You want to make a ban for Catalonia? That's fine, you can do what you want. But how dare you suggest that we do the same when we come from a different philosophy to you? They're very upset about it. Miri is very upset about this. And they issue 2 counterbans. Hachamim of Languedoc issue 2 counterbans. One ban they issue is, just listen to this. Yeah. The first ban is that if anyone prevents his son from studying philosophy or science under the age of 25 as a result of the harem of the Rashba, we will put him in harem. You understand what's happening here? So the Rashba is saying you put in harem anyone who studies under the age of 25. And the Hachamim of Languedoc are furious with this. How dare you? And they say, no. If you intentionally prevent your son who wants to study from studying under the age of 25, you'll be put in harem for doing so, because this is an essential part of the Torah. Meiri is part of this. They additionally put Abba Mari in harem for betraying Languedocian Jewry, because the Rashba was getting, you see this in the Rashba's letters, the Rashba is getting the impression, a very one-sided picture from Abba Mari. And Rashba is thinking that, oh my gosh, Languedoc, all these kofrim, all these heretics here, and all these philosophers and allegorizers, but he hasn't heard the whole story. So the Hachamim of Languedoc are very upset at Abba Mari. How could you do this? The Miri writes to him, how could you be mav'ishet rehenu? How could you give us a bad smell to the Hachamim outside of our community? So they put him in a counterban. Abba Mari himself stands up against this, and he counter-excommunicates those who excommunicated him, because he invoked the Gemara. The Gemara says that when you put someone in harem unjustly, then that person who put you in harem unjustly, he himself is put in harem. So Mari says, you put me in harem unjustly, I'm going to put you in harem for putting me in harem. Okay, yeah, that's how harems work. And now comes in the Meiri. The Meiri, we're not going to go through Teshuvah this week. We're going to leave that for next week. But here, I'm just going to show you the Teshuvah of the Meiri. Here comes in the Meiri. And this is the title, Teshuvah LeRabbeinu, a response to our master Abba Mari, Be'inyan Herem Aderabah, concerning the counterban which Abba Mari put, Ube'inyan Limud HaChochmot, and general idea of studying philosophy. And the Meiri is the authority. Let's go back to the map once more. The authority of Languedoc, especially of Peperian. So have a look back at the map again. So he's here in Peperian, and he is the authority in this area, in Narbonne. And he voices his objections to this ban, which we are going to discuss in greater detail next week. So basically, just going to summarize what we've done this evening, and then we'll see. It's a fascinating Teshuvah of the Meiri, which we'll see next week. Really fascinating. He writes in a very poetic and flowery way, but you see the importance he ascribes to certain things, and the way he writes. It's really, really fascinating, and it'd be lovely to see you next week when we finish this off. But what we've done basically this afternoon is give the context and historical background of this Teshuvah. We've seen how Jews migrated from south of Spain to Languedoc, and this had a huge impact on the intellectual pursuits of the Jews of Languedoc. We discussed the first controversy with the Rambam in the 1230s, which ended up very badly, but that was put to bed, and that was a more broad dispute. That was with regards to philosophy at all. But the controversy which we're dealing with is the end of the 13th, beginning of the 14th century in 1305, in which no one here is trying to ban philosophy outright. What they are trying to do is ban philosophy for those under the age of 25. And this is instigated by one of the Languedocian Hachamim, who views his counterparts as being too lax. And he tries to get the support of the Rashba, which eventually he does. And the Rashba puts in harem those who learn philosophy and science under 25. The Hachamim of Languedoc are appalled by this, and they issue a counter ban on anyone who tries to prevent his son from doing so. And they also put Abba Mari in harem for speaking badly of the Languedocian Hachamim. So that's a general overview of the contents of the Teshuvah, which we'll see next week. And Be'ezrat Hashem, I think it's the same time next week, Ethan? Same time? Yeah?
Absolutely, same time.
It's Tuesday, 5:30, England, 12:30, New York, next week, where we will delve further into this Teshuvah, and we'll go through it. If anyone has any questions now, anything not understood, anything elaborate more on next week, anything you want to ask, please feel free to unmute now. Okay, fine. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so I think that's it then. Thank you everyone for attending. It's been lovely with you all, and we hope to pick up next Tuesday, Be'ezrat Hashem.
Thank you so much, Chacham. Thank you so much as well for everyone joining us, and to the S&P as well. And we will see you, inshallah, next week. Thank you so much, Dayan.
Best wishes. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.